Hello, bio students. We are going to be starting our unit, and this is a unit that can sometimes strike fear in students' hearts. But I promise you, this is a really fascinating process, and that is photosynthesis. And it's just one of those really fascinating things to think that you've got this system that can capture light energy and make food from it, from carbon dioxide that's just in the air. I know I'm geeking out over this, but I promise you it's pretty interesting. It's pretty wild that it happens. And so hopefully, eventually, as you look at grass in the field and leaves on the tree, you can look at that and say, they are busy just sitting out there making their own food. And so it's real important for you to realize that plants don't just have chloroplasts, they do have mitochondria as well. So you want to think about this. The plants are making their food, and then that food is oftentimes stored, and then that food can then be broken down as needed. So whereas we have to eat stuff, eat um, animals and plants and fungi, whereas we have to eat other organisms to gain our energy, plants can make it. Now there are a couple of names for that. We have autotrophs. And autotrophs are organisms that can create their own food, synthesize their own food. And then there are heterotrophs. And heterotrophs are organisms that must consume organic material. Other animals, plants, fungi, protists, bacteria, they have to eat other organisms for food. So we would be heterotrophs. And of course, plants, algae, some bacteria are autotrophic. They're autotrophs. So now what we're going to start with is photosynthesis. And I think that's a little bit more intuitive for students to understand. So this is an overview, and this is very similar to figure 4.5 in your book. That's on page 104. If you wanted a reference point, you can go there and say, oh, okay, I see the similarity. So this is our humble little chloroplast. And we did label this before. We have the inner membrane and the outer membrane. And the membranes, at least on the chloroplast, are not quite the interesting part. The interesting point is going to be these stacks of thylakoid. I know that's kind of such a bizarre name for them, but these thylakoid membranes. So that's the green. So there's one thylakoid, there's another thylakoid, here's another one. And I don't know if you can tell, but this picture is kind of indicating that they're connected to each other. And yes, that can absolutely happen. This is not a static kind of thing. These are oftentimes interconnected tubes. So those are the thylakoids, and then anything else. So I'm gonna highlight anything surrounding the thylakoids, and I'm highlighting it in yellow. So all of this area, that is the stroma. Now I made a mess. Let me get rid of that. So the stroma is surrounding the thylakoids. Now that's an A. Sorry. So the stroma is surrounding the thylakoids. Now we're going to see two main processes overall. Now this diagram is what we would call a schematic diagram. It's showing kind of the basics idea, but I just want you to know, even though I'm labeling one side on the left and one side on the right, that doesn't indicate that it has to happen on the right side. But what you should notice is that this the one that I'm going to start first happens in the thylakoids. So let me go ahead and just put this down here. So we have the light dependent reaction. And so just as the name implies, it's dependent on light. And the light dependent reaction that occurs on in the thylakoid membranes and inside of the thylakoid. So that thylakoid, that's going to be really important. And then on the right, we're seeing what's called the light independent reaction. Now, that doesn't mean they're not independent. That doesn't mean they're not important to each other. So they are linked, but it does mean that as long as you give it whatever you need, it can happen without light. It's light independent. And that's going to happen within the stroma. So let me give you the overview. And so that's going to get us prepared to think about these things. The light dependence. Now over here, the little squiggly yellow, that's going to be light. And the light is going to be a little bundle of energy called photons. So these are light photons. And the photons are little packets of energy. And they're going to come along and they're going to excite the thylakoid electrons. Now, just because it's showing it in one spot, remember there's going to be one here and one here. There's going to be light coming in there and hitting all of these thylakoids here. And so all of these layers are getting bombarded with light energy. And that's going to be really important for how it makes food. So there we have our light. Now the blue is going to be water. And the water is going to be very important because that's going to be where we get our oxygen. Now, oxygen to the plant is just waste. It's just a wasteful product. But for us, of course, that's very important. So plants are producing the oxygen as the waste. Now, there's going to be something interesting about the water. Think about it. If we remove the oxygen, what do we have? Hydrogen. Watch for those hydrogens. They're going to be really important in just a little bit. So what comes out of the light dependence? We're going to get two molecules. One molecule is going to be NADPH. Now that's a bit of a mouthful if you actually knew what NADPH stood for. Nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate. And now you know why we go with NADPH. NADPH. Now the important thing to remember about NADPH, it's this little molecule that has a very humble function, but it's very important. It is a dump truck. And so you want to think about anytime you see NADPH, that NADPH is this little molecule that can hold a hydrogen and an electron. And that's going to be very important for how we're going to make our food, our glucose. The other molecule here is going to be ATP. Now, hopefully you're catching on that anytime you see those little explosion, that's going to be ATP. So these molecules are going to be funneled into the light independent. Now the light independent is a cycle. It just kind of keeps churning around. And this is called the Calvin cycle. But you can also refer to it as the light independent. So notice that we're going to put these energy molecules into the cycle. Now what's this gray? This gray is carbon dioxide. And through the energy and the hydrogens and electrons, we're going to be able to make our glucose. Although oftentimes it doesn't immediately come out as glucose, it comes as a 3-carbon sugar. But the plant can do anything it wants to with this. Now, think about what we learned in the previous video. Once ATP is given off its energy, it becomes ADP and a phosphate molecule. And so notice it's going to go back into the light dependent to be recharged, and then it's going to come back and feed that phosphate and energy, and then it's going to come back as a low energy ADP. It's going to go back and get charged. It's going to bring its energy, and then it's come back low charge. It's going to recharge, and it just keeps cycling and cycling and cycling. And so that's what plants want to do the whole time. The NADPH is going to be dumped in there, and we'll look at that in a little bit more detail. And once it's brought in there, it's going to be NADP, and it needs to be reloaded. Remember, this is like a little dump truck. And so once that dump truck is dumped, its load, it's got to go back and be reloaded. So that gives you a nice little introduction. We've got our light dependent, and the light dependent is going to make oxygen, NADPH, and ATP as its products. The light independent, which is going to make glucose as its product. That's what we want to get from the light independent reaction. Now, you can see where we're going to go from there. This looks a little daunting, but I promise you we can work through it. It's kind of cool. But just remember, that's the plant's goal, is to take the light energy, capture that light energy into little bits of chemical energy, and then funnel that chemical energy into this cycle, which can then use carbon dioxide and that energy to form glucose. That is our ultimate job. So hope this helps set the stage for photosynthesis. And remember, take notes. And then there's going to be one other assignment for a Google form just to help you practice. So have a lovely night and enjoy your non-teaching day tomorrow. Have a great day.